Hello and welcome back to Game Brigade. I am Brian Greer, and today on the show we are covering the Binding of Isaac 4 Souls. And there's a specific reason that we're covering this, and that's because the Requiem expansion is currently on Kickstarter, and I thought what a perfect time to cover this game and review it so you guys have a good understanding if this game might be for you or not. So we're going to dive in through the mechanics in terms of what works, what doesn't work, what I like, and what I didn't like. So if you're interested in that, we'll have timestamps down below for your convenience. But without further ado, let's go and hit it. Okay, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our standard gameplay stuff. We didn't do any setup because the setup is super incredibly easy. I have the setup basically right here in front of you. If you guys are new to my show, if this is something you haven't seen before, we do reviews and previews and playthroughs of our favorite board games. We also have conversations on topical issues. If you're interested in that, please click the subscribe button and join the community if you're interested in that. We also have a very healthy Discord community that we have a link down below. If you'd like to join Discord and get more conversations going, please check out the Discord. So how does Binding of Isaac work? Well, and what is Binding of Isaac? Binding of Isaac originally was an IP from a PC game, a roguelike PC game. And roguelike games are generally games that come from the tabletop RPG era, but are more generated, like random room generated hex movement tiles, or you could say permadeath, things that are more difficult, I would say, in terms of gameplay wise. And Binding of Isaac is one of those pioneers for that game. And this game is going to try to replicate that experience of playing that roguelike PC game in a competitive, I would say, co-op to competitive multiplayer card game. I think that's the best way to describe Binding of Isaac. So how does the game work? Well, we are going to have several different characters that players are going to choose from. So with this, they have the Who Am I deck, and these are all going to be different types of characters that you can pick from Judas to Samson to obviously Isaac and Eden. Most of the characters are, for the most part, identical in terms of their stats and abilities. At the top of the card, you have the health of the character as well as the amount of damage they do in combat. And then they all will have an ability to tap it to do an ability. And then at the bottom, they will have the starting items. Now, this is what makes each character unique in terms of their starting items. Eden actually has a very specific item, but otherwise you're going to have specific items that you will find in the starting deck, which is this one right here. So once you select your character, you'll find the starting deck that works for yours. All of these will also have specific rule sets to them, and we'll talk about that later. After that, the gameplay is ready to go. We have the treasure deck. These are going to be treasures that you locate throughout the game, or loot. We also have loot cards. These are going to be cards that we're going to have in our hand. And then we have the monsters, and the monsters are going to be what we need to defeat them to win the game and also collect more treasures. To win the game, you have to collect 4 souls, which means you must kill 4 monsters that have a little ghost dude here in the corner, and that shows that counts as a soul. So this is +1 soul for the Mask of Infamy. So what players will do is they're going to be drawing these loot cards, and then from that point, they are going to be playing cards from their hands. In fact, on their turn, there are 4 different actions that you can complete. You can play a loot card, you can attack a monster, you can buy a treasure, or you can use your activated ability from your character to play a second loot card. Now, it is note to say that the activated ability of your character can be activated on opponent's turns, but you have to do it in response to them performing an action. So that is the key part here. And for those who are, I would say, knowledgeable in Magic the Gathering, this game definitely feels influenced. And I'm not positive this game was influenced by Magic the Gathering, but in terms of the way it feels, the way that you implement the stack definitely feels influenced heavily from Magic the Gathering. Now, I will say now it doesn't play as cleanly as Magic the Gathering. We'll cover that a little bit later in terms of what I like and didn't like. So when players are on their turn, they can do one of those 4 abilities in terms of buying treasures, which cost 10 cents, attacking monsters, and playing cards. What I like about this system is that the players can do this in any order. So depending on how your opponents are going to react to you, because they could potentially play things on your turn, you might want to try to bait them into playing things on your turn so that you can have more information. I always tell people the more more information you have in any type of competitive game, the better you can make your decisions with that. So you always want to try to hold off as long as you can while you're playing. So to attack a creature, we would look at the creature we're going to attack. Now we have 2 active creatures here on the board. We can also choose to attack the top card here, but that is a random creature. And if we did that, the creature would flip and we'd cover one of the other active creatures, and we would have to attack this creature instead. When players attack creatures, both of them are going to keep going back and forth at one another until either the player dies or the creature dies. The health of the creature is located here. So this guy is 3. And you have a dice roll number. So this says 5+. We call it 5 up. Basically, that means you have to roll a 5 using the d6 dice to deal damage. If you do not roll the requisite number of dice, so if you do not hit a 5, you will actually take the combat damage located here. So Wizob does 1 damage. And then they have a special abilities below that. So when this dies, you may force a player to discard a soul card. So remember, these are soul cards. Other monsters are soul cards. So you could force an opponent to discard one, which will reduce their ability to win the game. And then at the very bottom, you have the death, the loot ability. So this says when you kill Wizob, you loot 3 cards. Now, let's talk about, though, if you were to die, because that is an important aspect. If Wizob ends up killing you instead, you are going to be taking the punishment of death, which is, I would say, not game-breaking, but it is very harsh. And I think that's in line with what a roguelike game is trying to do. So you will first have to discard any one loot card from your hand. And then you're also going to be setting, and I didn't really talk about this, but you are going to be setting up a tableau. So to give you an example, let's say we're Eden. Let's not use Eden. Let's use Isaac. Let's say we're Isaac, and I know Isaac doesn't use the bone, but he's actually perfect D6. He's going to have the D6, and he could have some other items like Mom's Purse and Jawbone. And what you're going to be doing in this game is you kind of create a tableau of items that you'll be playing out. So when I say play a loot card, loot cards can be played for their ability. So this one says gain 2 cents. You just gain the money. Or you play it as an ability like Mom's Purse, and now that has either a static ability or an activated ability that you can use. But if you were to die, you have to discard any one loot card from your hand. You then have to destroy one of your played loot items here. So we'd have to say destroy Mom's Purse. We'd also then have to discard a coin. This can have ramifications, especially if you're having a hard time building your tableau. So that's why I say it can be backbreaking. It doesn't necessarily hurt you, but the way the game wants to cascade on top of each other and you get your tableau going, it can be fairly difficult. So that is basically the game. Players will go back and forth between attacking monsters, drawing loot cards, and collecting treasures. Now, again, you can collect treasures from this. You have 2 that are usually open. So I had the Jawbone here in Mom's Purse. You can pay 10 cents to buy one of those, or you can pay 10 cents to get the random card from the top of the deck. And then with that, there are aspects of take that mechanics in this game where players are going to be attacking one another or have the option to attack one another. So there could be cards like Bob's Brain that says roll a die. When you attack a monster on a specific number, deal a damage to the monster you're attacking. On another die roll, you will hit another player, or on another die roll, hurt yourself. So there's going to be a lot of variability with that in terms of dealing damage to your opponents or dealing damage to the monsters, and potentially having a negative effect of doing damage to yourself. I do find the take that mechanics to be very pushed in this game, so it's definitely going to want you to be aggressive to your opponents, and that's why I find this game to be a better aspect for multiplayer games in terms of 3+, so that you're not just sitting there beating up on each other the entire time, or if one player gets an advantage, knocking the other player completely out of the game. So with that, let's talk about what I liked about this game. So first off, I want to really talk about, does this emulate the Binding of Isaac feel? Now, as a gamer, I play quite a bit of games. Binding of Isaac is not a PC game that I have played, but I have watched plenty of streamers on Twitch playing it, and just doing their run throughs. And a lot of times, the gameplay revolves around getting specific items or doing a specific run where you're trying to do different types of runs with different types of items. And I do feel that this game emulates that experience, at least from what I can gather watching the gameplay, very well. I like the deck, how there's a lot of different variabilities, and the different types of combinations of how the cards work together and the ways it plays in. Very, very impressive with that. Also, the loot deck is good and balanced in terms of making sure you're getting good cards and interesting cards, cards that play well with each other, or if you're not a player that wants to be attacking your opponent all the time, cards that have powerful abilities that don't necessarily feel bad. And then the monster deck does have some good variability. Now, there are several monsters in here that are way too punishing, and we'll talk about that when I talk about the things that I didn't like. But there are some very punishing monsters. But for the most part, the monsters are interesting and variable. I love the art in them. Really plays well into the mythos of Binding of Isaac. The game flow is also very, very rewarding. I like to talk about in terms of how does the game flow, how does the game play. In terms of a game reminiscent of what I would remind myself to like Magic the Gathering Commander type gameplays, where you have everyone around the table kind of policing each other in terms of how you're going to complete it. I do feel like this game has a very good flow. The way the games kind of encourages you to build your tableau and then use those cards in a combination is very fun. I do think that the floor in terms of learning this game is low, but the ceiling in terms of the actual in-depth strategy is a little bit higher, maybe like a medium to a little higher than average in terms of complicated abilities. Most of the abilities are pretty interesting, but there are some interesting combinations that you can do. You just have to make sure you remember to use all your cards. The co-op aspect of the game / competitive is interesting. They try to combine the two. I don't necessarily it works completely well, but I do appreciate the attempt to have the game give you the aspects of some co-opness, but also adding that touch of competitiveness. Although I don't necessarily think it's a great competitive game. So with that, let's talk about the things I didn't like. And talking about the competitive game, we're going to follow up with that. The game is trying to be a competitive multiplayer game. It does play well as a casual multiplayer game with take that mechanics. But in terms of being a competitive game, in terms of trying to make this strategical, I do think because of the randomness of the items, the definitely swinginess of the gameplay in terms of the way the monsters react, removes the ability to have true strategic value in the game. Not necessarily that it's not enjoyable, because as you're drawing cards, as you're getting what you have to work with what you have. It's very hard to go in this game and be like what you are doing by name Isaac and saying, okay, I'm going to do a jawbone run or whatever, and say I'm going to try to build my gameplay finding this item and doing this specific way. This game is so random and so hard to actually implement something like that, it doesn't work. And in terms of the competitiveness, if you're trying to play a competitive multiplayer game, usually there are types of metas that form or gameplay styles that work, and especially within a player group, you can have a different meta per player group in terms of what works and what doesn't work. This is so random in terms of how your tableau feels, the way you die, the destruction of your items. It definitely makes it more random. And so I think the competitive level is low, although I do think as a casual multiplayer game, it is enjoyable. As long as the players are okay with the ability that you are going to get punished at times, because players, the items are almost forcing you to have to hurt other players. So following up with that, I talked about this earlier, but I do think that gameplay is extremely poor at 2 players. I like to look at competitive multiplayer games and say, okay, how does this play at every player levels? This is labeled 2 to 4 plus. I didn't play above 4 plus, but we did play at different levels between that. And I want to know, does it play well at 4, does it play well at 3, and does it play well at 2 if that's what you're advertised. Between 3 and 4 is a sweet spot. Definitely find that those areas are really good, especially the 3 spot, just because you have more items personally that you can go through between the treasure deck and the loot deck. 4, you kind of start grinding through things a little too quickly. but that could be helped with, say, the Requiem expansion that's coming out, because you're adding more cards, you're adding more stuff for you to play with. So I do think the 3 spot is a pretty good sweet spot. 2-player, though, really not good, especially because a lot of times 1 player will get specific combinations of items that are very I would say work well together, have good synergies together, and then those things can have negative effects against their opponent and keep your opponent at a bad, kind of a stagnant level. So definitely don't recommend this game at 2-player, unfortunately. Like when I look at this game compared to Magic, Magic can play great at 2 players all the way up to 10 players. I mean, you could have a lot of players playing Magic in a single game. So when you look at that, when you combine it with this game, I definitely think this game has a little bit too much take that for my recommendation for a 2-player game. Okay, talking about in terms of the gameplay punishing aspect, there are certain things that I feel like I want to talk about. The monsters I mentioned are usually very well balanced and interesting, and encourage you to want to attack them to try to get the game completed. There were a few, though, that I find to be very punishing to the players, specifically the cards like the Lamb, Death, and Satan. So Satan says each time the attacking player rolls a 6, they must kill a player. And you have to get a 4 up, which means you have to get a 4, 5, or 6 to deal any damage to him. So 33% of the time you are attacking him and getting a successful roll, you are going to be killing another player, which means they have to discard a loot card, discard money, and destroy something from their tableau, which is going to be very punishing, especially if you do it over and over and over. He also has 6 health, so it's going to take a long time to kill Satan, which is not very beneficial to the other players if you're playing. So characters like that are punishing, and then if you eventually do kill them, you get 2 treasure cards, which is then going to make you even more powerful and kind of swing the game in a different direction. So I didn't care for that. Death says when this dies, the active player must kill a player. Again, punishing another player is very powerful, almost to the point that it becomes unfun. And then the Lamb is not very bad in terms of punishing, but it's an example of when this dies, you may force a player to give you a soul. So now you're getting basically 2 souls for killing one thing, which can swing a game in terms of the competitives. I don't necessarily mind that. But if you fail to attack that guy, he will basically kill you in 1 hit because he has 6 attack. So if this comes up, if you attack it, you have to kill 6. It's just impossible. You got to kill 6 health. You have to get a 3 up. If you miss, so you have 50% chance of hitting, but if you miss, you're basically dead yourself. And it's very punishing. So there are characters like that. Not necessarily all of them are like that, and you can remove them if you wanted to. If you're like, these are unfun, or they delve the game into a position that is not as fun as I'd like, you definitely can remove them. I just wanted to make sure I brought that up. So that is pretty much everything that I didn't like about the game. Does it work, and what do I rate it? So overall, what do I think about The Binding of Isaac 4 Souls? Is this a game that I would recommend to my friends, or am I going to be playing this continually in my player group? And I think, yes, I will keep this game at least for the next while. I enjoy it. I'm definitely going to be considering the Kickstarter in terms of what it can add to my collection. The multiplayer aspect is fun. I like the art. I like the mythos it's trying to bring out here. There are things I didn't talk about. I didn't mention this either. The rules on some of the cards are not as clear or as informational as I'd like them to be. The rule book, which I don't have over here, is very poor. It's just another pamphlet, paper. The actual game rules are quick and easy to learn. You can teach this game in about 5 minutes. I mean, I taught you guys in about 5 minutes. It's easy to learn, but there are some nuances in terms of language and how the cards want to work. Again, a game that feels like it's trying to copy Magic the Gathering, you have to have extremely tight rules to make a game like this work very, very well. And I think that's a lot of things that people skip on in terms of language and what you're specifically meaning when you say different types of keywords. But overall, I definitely think this is a great multiplayer game. If I'm ever having a situation where I have 3 or 4 players that I want to play some multiplayer with, I think this could easily replace some of my Commander or EDH type gameplay nights. And I especially like that we don't have to have individual decks for each player. If we want to play a card game that's easy and quick to play, that pulls out quickly, this is a great example of a game that you don't have to have decks. You just keep going, and everyone's going to have a good time. And for the most part, it's relatively balanced. Again, I think the biggest attractor for this game that would set it a little higher is the randomness in terms of the competitive level, as well as the take that mechanics. Don't necessarily care for those as much because of the feels bad. I try my best as a player to never be affected by feels bad, but it's, I'm not immune, and I don't think anyone else is immune to those feelings. So if I was to rate this game as of right now in terms of my rating scale, I use a 1 to 10 rating, with 10 being a pinnacle of the best games. I've never given a 10 on my channel. I've only given very select games 9s. 8s are basically a game that I think everyone should have in their collection. It's a game that should be a mainstay. A 7 is a good game. I don't think it's for everyone, but I think it could find a spot in your collection, and that is where this game will find itself in this one. A 7.3. It's a good game. I think there's a lot of aspects to this game that are going to be very beneficial to people. I don't necessarily think it's for everyone, though, especially with the type of art it has, the idea it has, and the way the take that mechanics are implemented. Definitely not going to be a game for everyone, but I do think this is a good game worthy to check out. This is The Binding of Isaac 4 Souls. Again, we're going to have more information about the Kickstarter later, so check the link down below for more information. I will talk to you all very soon.